Hi, this is John from New Evening Isle. As some of you know, about 2 or 3 days ago, I did a pretty monumentally difficult poetry performance or challenge where I recited On Children by Khalil Gibran in 34 languages, which was done in an attempt to find a more creative way to protest against ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, and to play some role, no matter how small, in reducing its widespread use as a treatment for autistic children. And after the coming days have passed since I've done it, I have learned way more than I anticipated doing this. And I'm not sure if any of the big things had anything to do with linguistics, surprisingly enough. I did just about as good as I thought I did. Sent it over to a few friends of mine who do know more about linguistics than I do. And they said that, just as I expected, my Eastern translations were pretty on par. They were pretty good. And I struggled a little bit more on the European languages, particularly on the R's. They said my pronunciation on the R's was not exactly right. But the attempt shadows the result in this. No, the intent shadows the result in this. So I'm really glad I did it, and this was one of the more meaningful projects that I've done in my career, in my performance art career, my poetry career, whatever it is. And I have my 17-page translation pamphlet that I used for the performance, still have it. And I am going to share with you 3 things that I learned as a person or as an artist, reciting one poem in 34 languages. And I hope to whoever aspires to live a life defined by art or poetry can learn a thing or two. All right, so in regards to sound poetry, this cemented, though not for good, but it really helped cement my love for sound poetry as a medium, which I've been dedicating a lot of my life to for the past year or so, actually creating sound poetry. Especially in regards to sound poetry versus sound poetry versus traditional poetry, the poet versus the world, sociology, stuff like that. So doing this performance made me respect sound poetry a lot more. It showed me that translations become sound poetry to the speaker unfamiliar with the language, but remain traditional poetry to native speakers. This created a strange and fascinating bridge. Even though I was not familiar with what I was saying a lot of the time, I don't feel I was performing gibberish. I was engaged in something that was, in this case, legitimately simultaneously abstract and fully meaningful, even though it's not meaningful in the same way as I did as the performer as to people that actually understand the poem in that language. Depending on who, and of course that's funny, is that it was a different type of meaningful depending on who's listening to it. This way it blurred the boundary between experimental and traditional poetry in a way I hadn't experienced before. This duality also made me realize how connected we actually are through language. Even when I didn't understand what I was saying at all, others did, and still found value in it. And that's my cat right there. And but it was meaningful to me too, as the performer. So it was very sociologically interconnected. This showed me that intention, effort, and delivery can matter just as much as understanding. This performance was not just mine, it was a shared experience, and it shifted how I saw poetry from a sociological standpoint. All right, so yeah, this was the most intense one. So this did feel a lot like stepping into a pool of darkness. I actually rehearsed this when I was at language 21, which was Mandarin Chinese. When I was at that point in the performance, I experienced definitely some sort of ego death, but it wasn't as intense as a normal, what people would think of as an ego death. It wasn't something out of a Terence McKenna lecture. It was not like a universal oneness or an out-of-body experience. It was a lot more internal than that. What started out as a simple recitation slowly turned into something much more extreme. And what was weird about it was both mentally and physically. The longer it went on, the more I realized I was entering unfamiliar territory on every level. I actually had a bloody nose from the performance. In the performance, I tell everyone that I have a runny nose because I didn't want to turn into something gross and chaotic, but it was actually a bloody nose. Maybe the stress from it caused my nose to bleed because I haven't really had one before or since in a long time. So this caused physical effects, which I guess was some new agey reminder of how real the stress of this performance was. It was exhausting, and in that exhaustion, my normal mental patterns started to break down, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just continuing. That shift made it clear that physical and mental strain are often mutually inclusive. If you want to access new places in the mind, you often have to pass through the body first. And it's crazy how, in a very abstract way, this performance at some point, which at some point meant language 21, it was going from fictional art into real life. It went from becoming an artist performing into a real life person going through a genuine struggle, actually struggling with this. So it became very real. My genuine struggle was part of this abstract fictional art. And that was where there was a strange ego death that happened. I wasn't performing anymore. I was enduring. And that act of endurance stripped away any idea of artistic control or identity. I came to realize that to go to places mentally you haven't been before, sometimes it requires going through physically very enduring circumstances. And in many cases, they are mutually inclusive. They are one and the same. The American novelist Thomas Pynchon said that repetition is energy, not time. And I'd argue also that time is the father of energy. As the poem repeated across 34 languages, and this was the most recent thing I learned, this didn't come to my mind until about 2 days later, something kind of shifted. I kind of realized that as it went on, I was not in control anymore. My sense of self as the artist started to dissolve, and I felt more like a conduit than a creator. The repetition didn't drain me. It reconstructed the performance so that there was a new artist, Father Time. Time became the driving force. It reached a point where I wasn't the one shaping the piece anymore, I think. Time was. The act of repeating something long enough hands it over to something bigger than you. In this case, it was time that created the rhythm, the pacing, and the eventual breakdown and rebuilding of the performance and my perception of it, as I explained with step 2. I didn't expect that. I thought I'd be expressing something instead, but I became part of the expression itself, shaped by duration rather than intention.